Today we're going to learn what is the greatest common divisor, or the GCD. Before I get into what exactly is the greatest common divisor, it is important to note that the greatest common divisor is sometimes called the greatest common factor, or simply the GCF. These are all one and the same thing, so basically the GCD, the greatest common divisor, is equal to the greatest common factor. So if you see the term GCF, think GCD. If you see greatest common factor as opposed to divisor, think greatest common divisor. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, what is the greatest common divisor and how do you find it? Well, first of all, let's start off with what is a divisor. A divisor is just something that divides a number evenly. So if you have any number and then you divide it by yet another number, if you don't have a remainder left, that is a divisor. And the greatest common divisor is just the greatest divisor across two or more different numbers. So let's see an example here. So what is the greatest common divisor for the numbers 18 and 12? What is the greatest common divisor for 18 and 12? Well, let's start off with 18 and write all of its divisors. What are the numbers that divide 18 evenly? Well, 1 divides 18 evenly because 18 divided by 1 is just equal to 18. What about 2? 18 divided by 2 is equal to 9 with no remainder, so 2 is a divisor. What about 3? 3 is a divisor of 18. 18 divided by 3 is equal to 6. What about 4? Well, no. 18 divided by 4 is not going to divide evenly. You're going to have a remainder left. What about 5? 18 does not divide by 5. What about 6? Well, yes, 18 does divide by 6. We already talked about that. When we divided 18 by 3, we said we had 6. So 18 divided by 6 must necessarily be equal to 3. So 6 divides 18. What about 7? 7 does not divide 18. 8 does not divide 18. What about 9? Yes, 9 does divide 18. We already talked about that when we divided 18 by 2. 18 divided by 2 is equal to 9. Therefore, 18 divided by 9 must be equal to 2. And then, what about 10? 10 will not divide 18, 11 will not divide 18, 12 will not divide 18, etc., etc. I mean, we're already past halfway towards 18, so none of the numbers between 10 and 17 will divide 18 because half of 18 is 9. So after you reach the halfway point, the last number that will divide 18 is just 18 itself. 18 divided by 18 is equal to 1. All right, now let's list the divisors of 12. So we have 12. What are the divisors of 12? Well, obviously 1 is a divisor of 12. What about 2? Yes, 2 is a divisor of 12. 12 divided by 2 is equal to 6. What about 3? Yes, 3 is a divisor of 12. 12 divided by 3 is equal to 4. Then 4 naturally has to be a divisor of 12. 12 divided by 4 is equal to 3. 5 is not a divisor. 6, yes, 6 is a divisor. 12 divided by 6 is equal to 2. And then, again, we're past the halfway point of 12. So 6 is half of 12. So none of the numbers between 7 and 11 are going to be divisors of 12, and the last number that divides 12 evenly is 12 itself. So these are all the divisors for 12. So let's list the common divisors for 18 and 12. Well, 1 is a common divisor. 2 is a common divisor. 3 is a common divisor. What about 4? We don't have 4 as a divisor of 18. What about 6? Yes, 6 is a common divisor. 9 is not a common divisor. 12 is not a common divisor. And 18 is not a common divisor. So 1, 2, 3, and 6 all divide both 18 and 12. But remember, we're not after any random divisor. We're after the greatest common divisor. The greatest common divisor. So what is the greatest common divisor amongst all of these divisors? Well, it's just the greatest number. 6 is greater than 3, 2, or 1. 6 is greater than 3, 2, or 1. So the greatest common divisor amongst all of these is 6. 6. All right, let's have another example. Let's have another example over here. So let's try to find the greatest common divisor of 5 and 7. 5 and 7. All right, so what are the numbers that divide 5? Well, the numbers that divide 5 are 1, 2 does not divide 5, 3 does not divide 5, 4 does not divide 5, only 5 divides 5. Well, if you're only going to get 2 divisors, 1 and the number itself, then you know that number is prime. 5 is in fact a prime number, so only 1 and 5 are going to divide prime. What about 7? Well, for 7, you're going to have 1 dividing 7. 7 divided by 1 is just 7. 2 does not divide 7. 3 does not divide 7. 4 does not divide 7. 5 does not divide 7. 6 does not divide 7. So only 7 will divide 7. This is because 7 is also just a prime number. So what are the common divisors amongst these two? Well, you have 1 that divides both of them. And then 5 is a divisor of 5, but 5 is not a divisor of 7. And 7 is a divisor of 7, but 7 is not a divisor of 5. So the greatest common divisor is just 1. Now, what happens if you're looking at two different numbers, say 5 and 7, and the greatest common divisor is just 1? Well, we call these two numbers relative prime. Relative prime. If the greatest common divisor between these two numbers is just 1, we would call these numbers relative prime. In this particular case, both of these numbers are actually prime, but they're also relative prime. All right, let's see one more example. Let's just see one more example. So what is the greatest common denominator for 6 and 14? Or rather, the greatest common divisor. This is not a denominator. This is the greatest common divisor for 6 and 14. All right, so let's start off with 6. What are the numbers that divide 6? What are the divisors of 6? 1 is a divisor of 6. 2 is a divisor of 6. 3 is a divisor of 6. And now we're halfway into 6, so 4 and 5 cannot be divisors of 6, and only 6 is a divisor of 6. All right, what about 14? Well, 1 is a divisor of 14, 2 is a divisor of 14, 3 is not a divisor of 14, 4 is not a divisor of 14, 5 is not a divisor of 14, 6 is not a divisor of 14, 7 is a divisor of 14, and again, we're halfway into 14, so anything between 8 and 13, including 8 and 13, are not divisors of 14, we're just left with 14. All right, what are the common divisors between... So what are the common divisors for 6 and 14? Well, we've got 1 is a common divisor. 1 is always a common divisor. 2 is a common divisor. And then 3 is a divisor of 6, but 3 is not a divisor of 14. 6 is a divisor of 6, but 6 is not a divisor of 14. 7 is a divisor of 14, but not a divisor of 6. And 14 is obviously a divisor of 14, but it's not a divisor of 6. So the greatest common divisor between 6 and 14, or the greatest common factor between 6 and 14, is just 2. So now you know what is the greatest common divisor or the greatest common factor.